Oh, just a reminder, everyone, we're going to record this session so that we have it in our archive. So if you don't want to be seen on the camera, please just, you can turn it off. We'll be active in the chat. So if you have any questions or things you would like to know more about, we'll have a little bit of a question period at the end. And we'll share the resources also to everything that they talk about inside the chat as well. And you know me, I love follow up. So I will follow up with an email tomorrow or the next day to everyone about this session and then look into 2026. But today we are going to start. This is a topic that some of you guys out there were interested in looking at as first years because it is a bit of a tricky topic on differentiation, and how do we widen our walls in our classroom so that everyone feels like they belong. Um, I know who to tap right away for this. I did a podcast with Devon and Jennifer last year, which I'll put in so you can listen to if you want to hear more about the amazing ideas and work that they do. Um, but I knew that they would be expert people to come and share their thoughts and um, their expertise with us. So today we have two consultants. I love their titles too. They're called Collaborative and Inclusive Education Specialists. So don't mess around with them, all right? We have Devon from New Frontiers, and we have Jennifer from Lester B. These are two consultants that you'll see present often because many people, as I do, tap them to say, hey, come and help us understand. So I really appreciate them coming and joining us. I hope you guys enjoy it as well. We'll let them kind of like ride the wave and we'll have questions in the chat. If you have any, we'll go and get them off at the end, but we'll let them go through what they want to share with us and then we can have our question period at the end. We are going to be done by 5 people so that you can get to your families and carry on with a bit of rest and relaxation. So with that, I will hand it over to Jennifer and to Devon. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Chris. We are thrilled to be here today with you guys. I know that it's not easy to come and learn more after a day of work. Working with young people is definitely exhausting, especially in your first years. So we are very, very appreciative of you all being with us today. So, like Chris mentioned, my name is Jennifer Mercer, and I'm here with my colleague Devon Warnock. The two of us were consultants for inclusive education at Lester B. Pearson School Board last year. Now, Devon has moved over to New Frontiers, where she continues the same role. So we still get to collaborate together, even though we are in different school boards. So that's super exciting. So, part of our role as consultants, we started out, the two of us, as classroom teachers. We actually met teaching at the same elementary school many years ago, maybe about 15 years ago now, I would say. And, we taught in classrooms. We taught in an area that had many, many diverse learners. And so differentiating was not something necessarily that was taught to us explicitly, but we sort of we had no choice but to differentiate in order to meet the needs of our learners that we had in front of us. So, this is like, I suppose, why we both developed an interest in this area, and we both moved on at different times to become consultants in this area because we had a little bit of experience in it. So what we do now day to day for our two different school boards is that we support resource teachers. We are sort of the main consultant that a resource teacher would go to. We also support classroom teachers when they need help with their IEPs, when they need strategies for reaching particular students that are in their classes. We provide PD to different school staffs. We provide PD on a school board level as well. We look at evidence-based recommendations and we really try to support teachers using evidence-based practices. We feel like that really is the way to go these days. And so our jobs are very, very multifaceted. We don't really do the same thing 2 days in a row. It really depends on the needs of the schools that we're in. We're both also attached to specific schools within our school boards. So I'm attached to 4 elementary schools and 1 high school, and I attend their weekly resource meetings. And if they have any concerns or if they have questions, I'm there to support them. And Devon operates very similarly in her board, except I think she probably has more than 5 schools at her board. But that's just sort of what we do on our day to day. So introduced us, I kind of, if you don't mind, just maybe unmute yourselves just to sort of give us a little idea as to who you are. So we know that you're first year teachers, but maybe if some of you can maybe raise your hand. Hold on, I don't know that I can see everybody. I
You
don't know if
can put
that's
it
a
in the
setting.
chat too, just so that we know who
Yeah,
our
let us
audience
know who
is.
you are and what you teach. That would be interesting. And I'm going to assume are you all first year? Or if you're not first year, maybe tell us how many years you have been teaching, a year or two, or and we can look at the chat there if there's anybody.
I'll go. Um, just because I don't know how to raise my hand and use Zoom yet. I'm sorry.
I'm having some issues too.
And I'm
I
still
feel like
trying to find the chat.
yeah,
I
Chris,
figured it
I
out
can't
just
see
now, but
anybody except Devon. Is that normal?
yeah, I was like, oh my
Oh,
gosh.
there we go. Perfect. Thank you.
It's
There was
just
a
because
split
we
second
had you
where
guys
I was
pinned.
worried that we
Okay,
didn't
okay,
even
okay.
have
I
an
was like,
audience.
all right.
We're all here. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Um,
Okay, go ahead.
my name's Tiana Gosby. I work at McLean Memorial. At the base, I'm a SCT, special education technician. Um, it's my first year as a full-time teacher, but last year I was at like 75% or something. I teach 7 different classes:
Yeah,
home economics, indigenous studies, finance, geo sec 1, sec 2, and I'm missing one. And
amazing.
digit. And
So
that's
you
it. Yes.
so you're doing a little bit of everything. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you, Tiana, for
no
introducing yourself.
problem.
I see in the chat we have, okay, so yeah, so we have some third year teachers, second year. Wow, look at that. 3-4 split class. So you really are, we're all from all different walks. But I would assume that the thing we all have in common here today is really trying to meet the needs of the multitude of levels that we have in our classes, right? There are no classes these days, I don't think, that are homogeneous. We really have a variety within our classes. So hopefully today we'll be able to offer you guys some strategies that can help you in your classroom practice. So look at this, 5th year, full teaching, 5 years, good, amazing. And you're from all over the province. This is fabulous. So welcome everybody. So today's session, we're going to look at the overview of inclusion and what does that mean. I know that different school boards sort of have similar yet different models. Lester B, is considered to be pretty much a fully inclusive school board. We don't have any specialized classes for students with autism or behavior. All of our students are incorporated in the regular classes. I know Devon at New Frontiers is quite similar. They might have a little bit of specialized classes within their school board, but certainly not at every school, at every level. So we really, I feel like throughout the province, most of the English school boards offer a mostly inclusive setting, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. And I know the French system is different. It's a little more they stream their students a little differently than what we do. So we're going to look over the definition of inclusion. We're going to talk about differentiating and what does that mean. And we'll also have a time where we can navigate the IEP. All right. So inclusion, here we go. So what makes a school inclusive? Okay, so inclusive schools, they offer a tailored curriculum that supports diverse learning needs, an accommodating physical environment, and valuable social interactions with same-age peers. So those are sort of the tenets of inclusion. And really what we say to our teachers when we work with them is when you're thinking about inclusion, you're really thinking about how you can ensure access for your students to these things, access to the curriculum, access to the school environment, and access to valuable peer interactions. So we don't usually like to start with a video right at the beginning of our presentation, but Shelley Moore is we wanted to include this video because she sort of goes through the evolution of inclusion in it, and she's quite entertaining. You might recognize through the video the different models of schooling that you might have experienced growing up. I know that when I was growing up, my school was not necessarily inclusive the way the schools are today, and so she sort of goes through the evolution of inclusion and we're just going to put that on for you for a couple of minutes to give you that overview. Oh,
Jennifer, I think you might have to unshare and then share your audio and then share again.
oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You
Go
think
ahead,
we
Dev.
would learn by now, eh?
I know. And we've sort of moved away from Zoom presentations. We're doing a lot of in-person stuff, so it doesn't take long to get rusty.
No worries.
There we
No
go.
worries.
5 minutes or
Okay.
less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's topic is the evolution of inclusion. Okay, so you remember the dots? I know. I've shown you these before. But one colleague of mine suggested to me once, he goes, what if we didn't look at these as different concepts that we compare to each other, but instead as an evolution of time? It was totally brilliant. Now we could look at this timeline through the lens of any marginalized population, but to understand this timeline from the inclusion and disability perspective, we have to go back in time a little bit. Many of us know or are connected to someone who experienced institutionalization. It was even recommended to families by doctors. Although British Columbia was the first province in Canada to close down their institutions, there are still individuals living in these conditions across Canada today. The institutionalization movement is an example of exclusion. It separated individuals with disabilities from their families without choice. But the disability rights movement over the past 50 years, with the hard work of some incredible self-advocates and families, and maybe a little help from Geraldo Rivera, pushed communities to shift so that individuals of all abilities were welcomed and living in the same settings as their family and friends. This shift from institutions to communities, this was the start of the inclusive evolution. We have movement, but can we do better? Although many individuals are no longer excluded from their families and communities, they were, and let's be honest, they still are, expected to attend segregated schools or self-contained special education programs that are totally separate from the rest of the school community. And so parents started to ask some very good questions. You see, children with disabilities have siblings without disabilities, and families wanted all their kids to have equitable access to community-based education together. Kids started to be integrated into classrooms with their peers. They're in math together. They're in gym class together. They're eating lunch together. Kids are together. This is better. The shift from segregated to integrated schools and classrooms, this is the next step in the evolution of inclusion. We have movement, but can we do better? Well, this is where things get tricky, because integration, it doesn't take long to realize that just being together, it's not enough. Although in the same classroom, students with disabilities are often just that. They're physically in the classroom. They may sometimes have parallel activities, but mostly it's loosely connected classroom tasks. Now, you don't need me to tell you that just physically sharing space and time is enough to make you feel like you belong in a community. I mean, come on, there are Disney movies made about this. Breathing the same air is not enough. Do you remember the Titans? I do. The evolution from integration to inclusion is now the topic of many conversations in communities and schools around the world. How do we support individuals to be meaningfully included and not just physically integrated? It's not just about where kids go in their day, but why. What is the purpose to the places that they go? It's now school-based teams and staff that are asking questions about how to do this. How can we support purposeful and meaningful placements for kids with disabilities? In inclusive classrooms and schools, students aren't just present, but they have roles and responsibilities in their classrooms and also meaningfully connecting to their peers. This is inclusion. So there you have it, my friends. A brief history of inclusion in about 5 minutes. If this is interesting to you, though, definitely investigate your local history as well, because every community is in a different place in this journey, and it's so valuable to know where we've come from. The other thing, though, is looking at these visuals as a timeline. It really helped me to shift my own thinking from which bubble am I at or not at, and shift to more about where are we now in our inclusive journey and what's our next step. All of a sudden, the goal of inclusion becomes action-oriented and just feels so much more possible. We may not all be at the same place in the journey, but we can all move forward. We can do better. And so this is the question I'm going to leave you with today. Can we still do better? Do you think there's another evolution in inclusion? What might that be? How can we inch even more forward to make inclusion even better? Thanks, Geraldo.
All right. Thank you so much, Dev, for figuring that out. So Shelley Moore refers to this timeline, refers to this image as a timeline, and I really like that thought because when Devon and I work with new teachers, we sort of challenge them to sort of position themselves on this timeline because I think we all sort of have a comfort level, and it might not be in the inclusive bubble because the inclusion bubble really implies that we have to be very flexible and we have to really know our curriculum in order to know what's an adaptation, what's not an adaptation. So the comfort zone might not be in that inclusion bubble, and that's okay. I think as long as we're all working towards that direction, I think we're on the right path, and not all teachers are there. Not all schools are there. I think, we're all at different areas in our journey in finding ways to offer a fully inclusive environment for our students. But I think it's just important that we're always sort of thinking about how we can do better and how we can be more flexible in order to meet the needs of our students that we have. So these are the bubbles that she's shown. And, what's next is sort of the challenge to figure out. So, one of the main things that we talk about a lot is what's the difference between integration and inclusion. And the two can be confusing because we have in our system helpers that we call integration aids, right? So even the language that we're using, sometimes we have to reflect on it, where we're an inclusive setting, but we have a class of employee that's called an integration aid. So we are looking at renaming that role. But just to say, integration really, in an integrated model, the student still has to adapt to fit the mold of the school or the classroom structure. So the focus is really on their physical placement rather than meaningful participation. So they might be in the same class as everybody, but maybe they're not doing the same things that their classmates are doing. They might be following their own completely different program. That would be integration. Whereas inclusion, it's really the school and the teacher that is adapting their practices in order to meet the needs of the students that they have. So the focus really is on belonging, it's on participation, equity, and not simply just sharing space together, but really finding ways for students to have a valuable role in the class and in the community. And inclusion presumes competence. We're really looking at it from, a positive perspective. What can the student do as opposed to what they can't do? So in order to meet the needs of our various learners, we really have to sort of wrap our brains around this notion of differentiation. So I'm sure that all of you are familiar with this word. Our understandings of it might be at different levels. But essentially, it's a proactive approach where educators adjust instruction, materials, assessment, and learning environments to meet the diverse needs, strengths, and readiness of all learners, of all students. Okay, so go ahead, Dev.
I saw a hand up. I just didn't know if there was
is there
a
a hand up?
question. We're happy to stop at any point.
Yes.
I saw a hand up.
Sorry to interrupt. So
Yeah, not at all.
We can do it at the end if it's better.
It depends what the question is. How about you ask your question and we'll decide
Okay.
if it can be answered now or if we
Yeah.
can address it at the end.
So you said competence when we talk about inclusion. So what the
Mhm.
student can do. But if we are at the level where we have certain requirement and the kid is not already at the requirement from the previous level, then it's a bit difficult to not make him do something else, right? So your task, you remove a number or two, but if he's not able to do even one, so that was just like a thought.
It's
Maybe
a
we can discuss later, but
Yeah, we
yes.
will. We'll get to it.
It's a great thought, and that's one of the challenges, right? Definitely. So, in terms of differentiation, the government has produced this document. I really didn't know about it until I became a consultant for inclusive education in this role. So when I was a teacher, I didn't even know that this document existed. And this document is not new. I think it's been around for more than 10 years. So it's a document on differentiated instruction where in it the government acknowledges that students are coming to us from a whole bunch of different walkways and different challenges and different learning styles. And so they specifically say that in order for us to reach our students, we have to adapt our curriculum in different ways. And so those three ways that the government talks about is through number one, flexible pedagogy, number two, adaptation, and number three, modification. So those are the three components of differentiated instruction. Okay, thank you, Chris. You're amazing on the links. Super. So you guys can check that link out. It's a good one. Okay. Oops. So yeah, that's it. So this is just a little visual of the three components of differentiation. Flexible pedagogy specifically is adaptable teaching to meet the diverse needs and preferences of learners, formative and assessment. It allows for skill content mastery outlined in the progressions of learning. So when you're offering flexible pedagogy to your students, you are still teaching grade level work. Nothing there is changed. You're just changing, you're tweaking some things in the environment or what the student is going to produce. But we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that on the next slide. So flexible pedagogy for adaptations. Sometimes flexible pedagogy is not enough, and we really have to put some more solid strategies in place for the student that get documented on the IEP. Those are called adaptations. It's basically a set of strategies that we individualize to the student and their needs, and student is following grade level curriculum at that point. And then sometimes adaptations are not enough, and students really need a more personalized program. And so this is when students are working not at grade level and they are given specific objectives, and you're basically changing what they're learning. So in terms of flexible pedagogy, this gives all of our students choice, okay? So choice in the pace, place, and methods for learning, as well as being able to demonstrate their knowledge in different ways. That's a real important part of flexible pedagogy. So the content and expected mastery of the skill or content is based on what's included in the progression of learning. So as I mentioned earlier, grade level work. But really, when you think about flexible pedagogy, it's just good teaching practice. It's not, it's not really anything super special. It's just good practices. And we'll talk a little bit about specific examples of flexible pedagogy here. So you can offer flexible pedagogy with your instruction. So this is when a teacher sits down with their students and has a discussion and accesses their prior knowledge, right? That is flexible pedagogy. This is, good teaching practice as well. So this is when you offer visuals and graphic organizers to help them with their work. Some videos for your visual learners to really see what the subject that you're talking about looks like. You're offering manipulatives, maybe in math class, models of what something looks like. You're offering students brain breaks, students that are having a hard time sort of sitting there for prolonged periods of time. You're letting them get up, you're letting them move. All of these things are flexible pedagogy. They don't need to be nailed down in an IEP. These are things that you can offer to everybody. Project-based learning is a great example of flexible pedagogy, offering learning stations as well. So in terms of the environment, sometimes it looks like playing a little background calming music at times, or allowing students to sit where they need to sit to best learn. Maybe some students don't need to sit to learn, maybe they need to stand to learn. And so that's, you being flexible and allowing for those things. Okay. Noise canceling headphones to help students focus more. And then in terms of assessment, you're allowing them choice. You're allowing them to, maybe choose to do a poster or a diorama to represent a book that they've read. You're giving them different choices. It's not everybody's writing the book report, but maybe everybody's read the book, but now we're showing our learning in different ways. You're allowing them to choose. Okay, so those are all examples of flexible pedagogy. This is just an example that you could find of a choice board. So, students have to do step 1, so they can either read the text or watch the video. And then they can choose, what comes next. It's up to them. And this is just another table in terms of allowing for flexible pedagogy. So in terms of the content, you're asking yourself, how can I adjust what the students are accessing? So this is when we're talking about, videos and things like that. And examples of the adjustment could be to simplify the text. If you find that the text is very complex, you can adjust it for them. You could adjust it for the different levels of reading that you have in your class. This is flexible pedagogy. Okay. How can I, yeah. And then here's just some images of some students in our board that engaging in different hands-on activities. Okay.
Okay, so thanks, Jen, for doing all that legwork at the beginning. That's fantastic. Full disclosure, I had a TV delivered as we got introduced, so I am still a bit flustered, and my son is home running around. So if he runs in, I apologize, but it is, just the way things work. So my section this evening is really on the IEPs, the individualized education plans. We're looking at what is it, who's it for, and why they're important. But before we do that, Jen mentioned this earlier about presuming competence. And so when we're talking about presuming competence, when you want to think about what that looks like in your classroom or in your discussions. And I think that part of the piece of inclusion is the discussion piece and the vocabulary that we use when we're describing our kids. We want to be using that strength-based approach vocabulary. We want to make sure that we're, supporting the way that they communicate. Because not all of our kiddos communicate the same. And it doesn't mean that they are not communicating just because they're non-speaking. If they're using an AAC device, we need to be presuming that they have competency within all of the realms of what we're looking at when we are evaluating our kiddos. And an IEP in a nutshell, in case you likely have students who are on IEPs, or perhaps you haven't had one yet, which would be surprising, but hey, weirder things have happened. But it is a legal and confidential record of a planning program for a child, okay? So it is the process in which we put in place when a child is struggling, when there's a challenge that has been met at school. It is a flexible document. It's not something that is written in stone and there for the year. We are hopefully looking at it continually, looking at it, making sure that the competencies that we're looking at make sense for the kid, that the strategies that are on there make sense. And it is absolutely required if a student is identified with a code, or if there's actually adaptations and modifications in place. But sometimes what I think is even more important is what an IEP is not. An IEP is not a document aiming to normalize a kid or normalizing a child's challenge or behavior. It is not a description of a kid's disabilities or their difficulties. It is not a description of everything that is going to be taught to the kid. And it is not a list of every single teaching strategy that you're using for your regular classroom instruction. So that's what an IEP is not. And it's really important to keep these things in mind, because when we're developing them, the key piece is that it's individualized based. So it's based on where the kid is at in their journey and what they need in their next step. And so part of what we often refer to when we're talking about IEPs or plans for kids is that, as educators, it's really our job to find the right prescription. It's our responsibility. So sometimes a small tweak, and that could be flexible pedagogy for those kiddos who just need a change in the pace, place, or method. But really, it's looking at how we can tweak something to give access to the curriculum. But when that's not enough, and so Jen had listed all those wonderful strategies that we can put in place, we can offer adaptations. And this is where an IEP comes in place. And this is how we're changing their learning. We're not changing what they're learning, we're changing how they're learning. And when we're looking at that, we're still looking at the grade level curriculum. They are being evaluated according to the regular program. The strategies that are required, they go beyond the flexible pedagogy. We're now saying this is no longer a choice for the child. This needs to be in place for the child to be successful. And if we're outlining those individualized strategies, that's when we would consider gathering a student service meeting, a resource teacher meeting, at whatever you call it within your boards. I know we all have different terminology, but essentially when we're talking about a student, this is where we would outline individualized strategies and create that IEP. When we're changing how they're learning, common adaptations could be reducing the amount of work as long as we're not reducing the level of difficulty. Extra time to complete tasks, that's often the number one thing I see in an IEP. If I'm looking at any adapted IEP, there's always that 1/3 extra time, and the 1/3 is prescribed. So that's the max amount of time that you are allowed to give to a child who receives extra time. It could be an alternative workspace. It could be breaking assignments into shorter tasks. And there's a list of things that you can put into place for a child. But again, it's individualized based on where the kid is at in your classroom. This is an important document. And for those of you specifically in high school, but also in elementary, we do have MEQ exams. This is from 2022. We couldn't get a screenshot of a more recent one, but essentially the ministry every year sends out sanctions. Typically, every school board has a sanctions person. So in my school board at New Frontiers, we have somebody who is part of their dossier. So they are in touch with the ministry to get the new sanctions, to get any updates on it, because sometimes the ministry decides, oh, this is now allowed or this is no longer allowed. So it's really, really important that you familiarize yourself with these documents if you're teaching specifically grade 6 in elementary, and if you're teaching any subject content in high school, because if you are giving an MEQ exam, if a child requires adaptations for that exam, you need to know what's authorized, and those have to be in place way before the exam. So one of the questions we sometimes get from new teachers is, oh, the exam is at the end of the year. Now it's April. Okay, so I should put an IEP in place. And it's like, no. That needed to be in place typically at least 6 months beforehand to do a trial base to make sure that the strategies that we've chosen for the child actually work, the student has access to them, and it actually ensures their success. So it's really important that for any student who is on an IEP or is like that gray zone kid, you're not sure, that you talk about those students in enough time to prepare them to use those adaptations, to use those strategies, especially when it comes to technology. There's nothing worse than handing a kid, and this happens especially in high school. A lot of our high school teachers say, well, I don't have access to laptops or technology in my class, so the kid doesn't have access to it, but he has it for the exams. But the learning process that needs to take place for that laptop to be an effective tool is a long process for a lot of our kiddos who are identified as, at risk or struggling or have a learning difficulty or disability. So it's really important that if any of these things are put into place, that they're regularly used by the student, so that you can ensure that they can be successful when it comes to evaluating them, especially when it comes to the MEQ exam schedule. So a couple of things to consider when we're looking at a child who is struggling. When we're looking at the objectives set out in the IEP, we're reviewing, have they been met. If they have, great. Is there a new objective that we want? Is there new strategies we'd like to try? When we're looking at objectives, again, every board is different. Some school boards have objectives for behavior. School boards have objectives for social participation within an adapted IEP. Other school boards have, only strategies in their adapted IEPs, but it's really important that we are adjusting and reviewing these means on a regular basis, because when you get to a point where a student is struggling and the strategies are no longer enough, we need to have data and documentation to say, we've tried all these things. Here's the learning profile of the child. And now we're really considering a modification, because that's where we're changing what they are learning. And once a child is modified, it does open some doors and it does close some doors. So it does remove them from grad track if they remain on it for the remainder of their school journey. But it does allow them other opportunities into our work orientation training paths. It does allow for different means to be put in place. But the biggest takeaway that we have when we're talking modifications, we're changing what they're learning, and we have to have a very clear picture of the learning profile and why we need to change what they're learning. Because it's not enough to say, well, they're struggling and they're still failing. Well, why is that? Do we need a psych evaluation? Do we need an SLP to come in and do a consultation? We need to have a clear indicator of the breakdown of the pinpoint of where is it that the child is struggling, and how might we put some more support in place before we modify any subject area. This is the progression of learning. They're all online, but what's really important when you're choosing modified objectives, so you have a child, they are now following a modified IEP. We are looking at the competencies that we are going to evaluate them on. We're going to be looking specifically at the modified expectations that are going to be directly linked to the QEP. So you're not creating goals out of nowhere. There is a progression of learning that really describes where a child could be at each grade level. And if we notice that a child is, more than 2 years behind with a significant difficulty or challenge, maybe they have a handicap code, they have a mild, moderate disability, intellectual disability, we might consider looking at a modified IEP, and then we're going to bring out a progression of learning and saying, okay, where is this child at? So that we can ensure that the objectives that we've chosen and the type of supports or our actions are going to be implemented to help develop that competency. So you're not just choosing a lofty goal for the child. You want to be really specific, because then the type of support you offer is going to be able to ensure that they can develop that competency within the term that you've set it for. What's really important, again, about a modified IEP, the child is no longer following grade level objectives within that competency. We have proven that the student is not successful with adaptations. The modifications are individualized objectives. So you can't say, oh, I have 3 kids in my class, they're all going to be modified. They're all on modified IEP, so they're all going to be working on 2-digit by 2-digit addition. It's like, well, maybe they are all at the same, level for that numeracy skill, but it might be that they all are different levels. And that definitely gets tricky when you're teaching multi-levels within a classroom. But really the objectives have to be selected for the individual kid. And we're also evaluating them with different criteria. When we're looking, and then it's directly linked to your report card, and those percentage marks that child receives will not be included on the report card average. Some common modifications might be adjusting our evaluation criteria. We're looking at, making the competency more attainable. So bringing it down to 2 to 3 years behind what the competency you're currently teaching. You're probably going to emphasize on those foundational skills. So those literacy skills that they may not have, the decoding skills, the numeracy skills that that number sense or operations that haven't been mastered yet. That's likely where you're going to be when you're talking modified objectives. And we're likely simplifying those tasks, and we'll give you some ideas of what you can do there here. So this is inspired by Nicole Eredick. So she has a way to describe 4 different ways to modify, but I like to say differentiate, because you could technically use all of these different ways to differentiate your curriculum, but specifically it's helpful when you're talking about modifying a child's objectives. So there's 4 ways that you can do that. You can alter what you're giving them, so that content. You can modify your expectations. So for example, I'm teaching grade 6, my students have to write an essay. My child's who modified may have to write 3 complete sentences. So my expectations will be different. You might be looking at varying the difficulty, so adjusting that workload that the kid's going to get. So instead of, writing that full essay, now they're going to use a graphic organizer just to plug in the information that they would turn into a paragraph. Or you're going to vary your instruction. So you might be using technology to help the child communicate. And again, that evaluation criteria might look a bit different as well. But these are just 4, I hope, really clear ways that you can differentiate for any kid, specifically when you're looking at those objectives and how to do that in a multi-level class. Because when you're talking multi-level learning, and Jen mentioned it earlier, and there was a question, what do you do when, somebody hasn't attained the competency and now I'm teaching them and they're behind? They have to do something different, absolutely, but they can still be doing a similar type of activity to your students, because at the end of the day, we don't want to isolate the child. We don't want to further make them feel that they're not following the regular curriculum, because what ends up happening typically is those students who struggle and are not being planned and prepared for become your behavior difficulties. And that's where you have trouble with classroom management. And I remember being a first-year teacher and feeling that stress of, I've got all of these different learner profiles in front of me, and now I've got behavior coming at me. And it turned out it's because a lot of my kids, my expectations, I was teaching way above their level. And so I had to be really creative in how I not just, gave the information to my students, but what my expectations were in terms of how they were able to show me what they knew. And that really helped me in my classroom management, because then I was able to really have a clear idea of the learning profiles of my kids and tailor my lessons to that. But also, when it came to evaluating, it made my life a lot easier when I had clearly identified, rubrics of where my kids were at. And if I had kids that were at a different level, I could really see where they were within the progression of what the expectation would be for the regular classroom as well. And a really important piece about reviewing plans, and this, unfortunately, because one of the currencies we don't have a lot of in school is time, but we do need to spend time reviewing our plans. And each school is given IEP release time. So every school gets IEP release days to release their teachers to meet, to create, review, comment on. But we really need to look at them regularly and remember that if a strategy is helping a lot of your kids, it's okay to use it for the whole class. It's okay to offer that flexible piece to all of your students. And really, with that good planning and the teamwork, IEPs really do help in, create those inclusive classrooms where all of our students have that deep sense of belonging. Because when kids don't feel like they belong, or they don't feel that they were planned for, it makes an inclusive classroom very difficult to manage and to evaluate. And so another important piece to think about is when we're talking about communication, especially within the school, if you have developed an IEP for a student, make sure that all the stakeholders, so your phys ed teachers, your music teachers, your art teachers, your subject content teachers in high school, that they know about the IEP, that they know what strategies and tools work for those kiddos. Because we need to make sure that those are being available to the child throughout their whole day, not just in your classroom. And of course, a really, 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 really big piece is the parent piece. We need to make sure that our parents are informed regularly, and legally there needs to be a minimum of 10 communications a year for a child placed on an IEP. A question we always get is, well, what if they only open an IEP in March? Do we need to do 10? You probably don't have to, but if, likely you would like to have 10 communications with a parent. And it's that collaboration piece too. So when we send home an IEP, typically we send it home as a draft. We want their feedback. We want to know what they think about the IEP, if they would share any strategies that work really well at home with their child. that collaboration piece is really important, and we encourage it as much as possible. But again, we know that time is tricky in schools. But we do need to have the parents informed about the IEP because it is a legal document and it's a confidential document. I'm going to pass this back to Jen because I've spoken way too much. And I need to take a sip of my very cold coffee at this point, but I'll pass it back to Jen.
So we only had an hour with you, right? So we gave you sort of like a crash course on inclusion, differentiation, the IEP, but hopefully we'll be able to provide, some more training at a deeper level if that's, desired by you guys. And, we can certainly be in contact with Chris for that. But we just wanted to sort of leave you. We'll also address some questions. There's a good one in the chat that I'd like to address, but we'll finish up the presentation. And I saw Jeff's hand. You had a question too, Jeff? Perfect. So we'll get to that in a couple of seconds. So the last thoughts that we want to leave you with is just to think about where are you on that continuum that we looked at earlier from Shelley Moore. And just, try to challenge yourself to always sort of move towards the right. And are you offering flexibility to meet the needs of your students? And I think for a lot of teachers, especially now, so now I'm noticing in the schools that I'm in is a challenging time for a lot of teachers. We have government cuts. There's a lot of things that are at play right now, and teachers are tired. And we are having a hard time meeting the needs of everybody. And when teachers get tired, we tend to get rigid. So, my last thoughts, that I would like to leave you with is, are you offering some flexibility? Are you able to offer a little bit more if you don't think you're offering any? And just challenge yourself to do that, and you'll see that it might make a difference. It will make a difference in your class and especially for your learners. Okay. So thank you so much for being a active audience at 5 o'clock at night. I can't believe the chat. You guys are fabulous. So before we get to Jeff, I'll just address Dora. So Dora, you had a really great question in the chat. She's asking, I am differentiating for students who are not on a modified program. During remedial time, I work with them on lower level skills. Is that okay? In class, they receive the same instruction as their peers, but I provide scaffolding such as using my macaroni table to read instructions aloud and guide them step by step. Yes, that's okay. In fact, that is fabulous that you do that. So you're really giving them what they need. And the whole premise, in terms of adaptations, right? So ultimately, the students, unfortunately, do have to be evaluated in the same way as their peers in order to stay adapted and not be modified. So if you're evaluating them in the same way as their peers, but on the side, you're giving them those scaffolds and you're giving them that extra practice that they need, that is 100% okay. And that is excellent teaching practice. All right. Jeff, what was your question?
I was just going to say, I just wanted to add one thing to that. When we're talking about the RTI model, which is the response to intervention, which is what we encourage really our resource teachers and our school teams to consider when they're planning for kids who do have challenges or specific learning difficulties. That's the model we want. We want to ensure that at that tier 1 instruction, they're still getting that rich classroom instruction, and that in those small groups you're doing that skill building. So you're grouping by skill and you're attacking those skills with intervention, and you're going to screen, monitor, diagnose to see if you're bridging that gap in skill. Because when you have that skill deficit, when you're giving that instructional tier 1 instruction, you're not getting it there. They're going to get that in that small group. So that's perfect. That's what we really want. We want to see that deep, rich tier 1. And then in that tier 2, where we're looking more closely at the grouping kids by skills, that's where you'll see the magic happen when it's in a smaller group.
Jeff.
No, sorry, I had to unmute. Can you hear me? Everything's good?
Yes, all good.
Great. Excellent. Sorry about that. I really had to go to the washroom. I haven't been since like noon. So
life of the teacher, yes.
So the all this stuff though, like so I'm a music teacher.